So the purpose of our DSI study group session is to bring our DSI members together. This is a benefit just for the 130 some people that we have registered for the meeting right now. And so to get together throughout the year and have a chance to learn outside of the meetings and also have another chance to see each other and network a little bit. Of course, our focus is on developing your skills around presentation skills, your content development and solutions, and also, business strategies and solutions is the focus that we teach here. And just as important to me is fostering supportive, collaborative relationships with your colleagues. And so ultimately, our hope for you is to build your skills and influence while expanding your inner circle through your association with Dental Speaker Institute. So that brings me to our guest speaker tonight, my dear friend, Dave Striegel, Dr. Dave, and thanks for being with us, Dave.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I
met Dave, gosh, I don't know, forever ago. I never remember, but it was like at a workshop Catherine Eitel Belt did, I remember, in San Diego. It has to have been over a dozen years ago. And was so impressed with his kindness and his intelligence, quite frankly. And it just has been over the years, multiple times we've either worked together or connected through a training or something. And now for a couple of years, Dr. Dave has been a faculty member with Dental Speaker Institute. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. He holds a PhD in sports psychology. And Dave has worked for, I'm guessing, probably about 30 years as a performance coach. Did I update your bio right? 25 to 30 years.
I've never had anybody actually say that, but yeah, I guess it has been.
I was reading your bio. I think it was an older bio, so I'm guessing probably closer to 30 years as a performance coach, consultant, and speaker. He's worked with individuals and organizations, including professional and elite amateur athletes, Fortune 500 executives, business owners, doctors, top educators, and law enforcement specialists. What a variety of people. The concepts and principles that Dr. Dave teaches applies to anyone wishing to improve their performance. He specializes in helping highly motivated, highly focused clients and their teams learn to thrive under the pressure that accompanies pursuing greatness in their chosen field. I love that sentence. And that's what brought him to dental speaking and consulting and working with dentists as well. So with that, I would love to, again, say thank you, Dave, for being here. Oh, and I know I also want to mention, as a faculty member, Dave offers a fabulous workshop. It's called Take Your Shot, Perform Under Pressure. And Kim, if you could put the link to that workshop in the chat for us, and you guys feel free to use your chat during our session. Would love for you to. And so his workshop is, Dave, is it a 5 hour, 4 or 5? Do you remember?
It was originally 6 hours. And that's kind of where I've kept it.
Excellent.
With a little bit of break in the middle.
The day just flies. And when I took that workshop, it is part of our curriculum for our fellowship, for Dental Speaker Institute's fellowship program. And when I participated in that workshop, nobody wanted to be done. I remember we were hanging around like 20 minutes after it was over. And at one point you said,
like, I gotta go.
Or something like that. We're like,
I love you guys, but
it was so good. So tonight we'll give you a little taste of what Dave is about. And you know what I'll do too, Dave, when I send out that email, with your permission, I'll replay your presentation from Jumpstart this past January, where you had done a 15 or 20 minute TED Talk.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you bet.
As well. So I'll include a link for that as well in the email that will come out to everybody here in the next couple of days. So just wanted to be sure and mention that workshop is April 21st. Right after tax day in this coming year. So, and virtual. So you've got the link in your chat. And with that, I think we just jump in. Does that sound good, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So we have a couple of questions for you. And if you guys have questions along the way, of course, we're talking about performing under pressure. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in chat as well. And we will be happy to do Q&A here in just a little bit. So given the state of our world, meaning like the economy, the country, that sort of thing, Dave, what do you see audiences need the most from speakers right now? And how should that influence a speaker's approach to speaking, to delivering presentations?
I think probably the most kind of the simplest answer to that is certainty. And the reason I say that is because over the last 5 or 6 years, I've done a lot of reading and researching into the neuroscience of performing under pressure, specifically relative to leadership, because that happens to be where I spend a lot of my time, and certainly in the dental field, is coaching the leaders to be better leaders and more effective leaders. And there's a neuroscience model that was created by a gentleman named Dr. David Rock, R-O-C-K, that is very straightforward and simple, but very powerful. And the acronym is the SCARF model, S-C-A-R-F. And you can find it on YouTube. You can find it all over the internet if you want to learn more about it. But it has been instrumental in me being able to really better understand what's happening inside our brains as not just leaders, but also as just people, especially as it has kind of played out over these last couple of years. I didn't realize obviously what was going to happen, but when I started diving into the neuroscience of performance and et cetera, little did I know it was going to be preparing me for the pandemic and helping to guide my clients, and I was invited to speak at a bunch of different virtual meetings, et cetera, about how do we navigate through this. And the SCARF model really gives a simple approach, I think, that any of us can apply to our lives, that's going to at least be a place to start. And the acronym of SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Now, in a workplace, and that's really where this model was designed to apply, is in the workplace. You can see how each one of those components fits into basically determining whether the brain is triggering what we call the threat response. And that's hardwired in all of us. So at any given moment, we're assessing, our brains are constantly assessing, am I in a threat situation or, a safe situation? And so what happened when the pandemic hit was we all got thrown into a threat situation and we didn't know what was going to happen. So our brains were out of control. And as a result, all kinds of things happen as a result of that. Not the least of which is we start to have resources diverted from our prefrontal cortex, which is really where our conscious thought is and where we make decisions, et cetera, kind of back to the emotional parts of our brain, and then even down to the fight or flight response. So when I think of the question around what our audiences needed most from us, I look at it as they need reassurance, they need connection, and they need a certain element of autonomy. And that's where the concept is, to me, of certainty comes into this. And this is what I advise all of us to do, is anytime you're in a speaking situation, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, I find that the audience doesn't need more information as much as they need more certainty. And why do I say that? Because what I see happening a lot of times is we might attend something and we come away with pages and pages of ideas. And how many of those things actually get applied? And so if you can, as a speaker, maybe even condense or simplify, the numbers of things that you walk them through that might be novel, and then circle back and create a repetitive element to your speech that allows people to then become more certain and actually remember what they've learned. I find that helps kind of alleviate the I say threat. We're not, it's not physical threat, but the idea of, okay, I'm not going to remember this, or what am I going to do when I get back to wherever I am going back to, etc. So reassurance, connection, an element of autonomy through this notion of certainty. I find that if we can cut stuff down a little bit and go through the repetitions, then I think that's really what most people need more of right now.
Wow, that's really cool. So thank you for that. Now, so what I'm thinking too is, and what I hear in that is hope too, right? The certainty is also that hope, like leaving them with that.
100%, because that's obvious. We all know that hope is a very powerful emotion and one that's essential to survival when you're in difficult times. From a performance perspective, hope is really, really important, but it can't, your focus can't stay on hope. And the distinction here being is that hope is something that's in the future. Performance happens in the present. And there's a certain element of skill that you have to develop as a performer to bring your mind back to the present and deal with just what's in front of you. As you mentioned, my background started in the world of sports. And if you get too far focused into the future, you start to make mistakes. And remember this too, that fear is a function of being focused in the future. That's where it starts. Because it's virtually impossible to feel fear if you're focused in the present. Now, we could debate, when it starts, but the mistake a lot of people make is they go too far into the future and stay there, and forget to come back to what am I doing right in front of me? Because that's where the control comes from. That's where that certainty comes from.
That makes sense.
What am I doing next, as opposed to 3 or 5 steps down the road. That's really powerful.
That's really powerful. I'm watching reactions here to absorbing that. And you just laid a big one on us. That's pretty. I mean, that's powerful, right? Because right now, I totally see what you're saying. Like right now, we know what's going to happen next in this presentation or in our time together. But fear is totally futuristic. I don't really think that.
And that's the big challenge, right? Is I don't want to ignore something that might harm me in the future, but if I need to perform best right now. So whether I'm seeing a patient in 3 minutes, or I need to address my team, and I just got some bad news, or or I'm unclear about something, you've got to bring it back to what's next. And if you're going to err on anything as a speaker, in my opinion, it has to be with certainty. I'd rather someone go back and repeat what they've said, summarize, do some kind of activity that allows the audience to work with what they've already shared, as opposed to trying to dive into new content, because the audience, in most cases, what I see is the audience needs to go back and hear things again. And that's really where things start to deepen.
Fabulous. Well, that's awesome. So I'm gonna move on to our next question. I think, unless you had anything more you wanted to add to that, Dave.
Nope, that's good. We're good for now, I think.
And then because there was a lot in there, and so if there's as you guys are looking at your notes, as you're thinking this through, if you have any questions, please put them in our chat, and we're going to get to those here in a few minutes. And I think I'm going to want to chew on that a little bit more, but I want to get through these other questions here as well. So coaching people to execute under pressure is a particular expertise, I know, and a focus of yours. So how does today's business and speaking environment affect a speaker's perception of pressure? And what can they do to make it work for them?
If we think about what's going on in our world right now, just fundamentally, I don't know about everybody else, but I feel a sense of uncertainty, whether it's in the economy, our political situation in our country. I'm not even talking about the pandemic. That's almost like an afterthought, it feels like, to some degree, which is really interesting to think about. But I almost forget that we had one because there's so much other stuff going on right now that is taking my attention. But I find myself being uncertain about a lot of things. So if you think about pressure, in general, pressure is a perception, because what may feel like pressure to me, like if I needed to prep a crown, I'm not a dentist. So there's the amount of pressure I would feel would be, I'd collapse on the floor because I wouldn't even know where to start. Whereas a seasoned dentist is going to be like, yeah, no pressure at all, because I've done it 1,000 times or 100,000 times or more. So perception or pressure is a perception. So with that being the case, then it's a matter of how do you adjust your perception of the situation you're facing so that it feels controllable. Because remember, pressure is like a cousin of fear. And it really does go hand in hand with being future focused. So what I try to coach my clients to do is be well thought out with what in front of you, but be open-minded to the directions you can go. So it's kind of like if you're driving on a freeway, you know, and you've got to decide, okay, which exit which entrance ramp am I going to start on? You do have to make a decision about that. But as far as which exit you choose to take or detours you choose to take, that can be emerging as your trip goes. And that's how I look at a presentation. Now you have certain exits you need to take, you know those, but other detours, in fact, I like to think of it as memorize your topic, not your presentation. So that gives you the flexibility to take detours. And I think that's where true freedom comes from when it comes to speaking. And freedom helps not having the pressure of having to say it a certain way or even necessarily in a certain order. Though I know many of us use slides, myself included. The order does matter when you're using slides. But I always like to leave room and encourage people to leave room for stories and for things that come up from questions. And I don't know about all of you, but when I speak, I never can predict the kinds of things that are going to come into my head that I may not have remembered in my prep. But something came up as I was speaking, and all of a sudden, that's a really relevant story.
Yeah.
So pressure is a perception. The other thing I know that is powerful is if you're a person who really battles performance anxiety, then one of the things that helps is to actually learn about what's happening to your body and your brain when you feel that feeling. And one of the tools that actual science has shown is the power of gratitude. And this concept of feeling like you're sharing with your audience, but that you're really feeling a sense of gratitude, that actually decreases activity in the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that gets activated when you feel this anxiety. And feeling a sense of gratitude, emphasizing gratitude, also triggers the vagus nerve, which is not like Las Vegas nerve. I don't know that there is such a thing as a Las Vegas nerve, but the vagus nerve really helps us to be able to feel calm. The other tool that I find is really helpful, and this really has come more from the special forces and people who are in kind of life and death situations, is the controlling of your breath. Because remember, pressure is maybe a mental perception, but it becomes a very physical and physiological effect or instance that you can actually begin to gain control over if you control your breath. So these are all little tools that various people in different walks of life use in order to kind of keep their mind focused on what's in front of them.
Excellent. Are there other tools for, you mentioned performance anxiety, like if I come back down to kind of a basic level, some other tools for speakers and consultants to help them handle their nerves on the stage?
I find that and you know how I mentioned earlier, memorize your topic, not your presentation. I do, and I do this in many respects too, kind of depending on the audience, but I like to start with a story. I like to start virtually every presentation I give that this is a little bit different type of scenario this is, but I like to start every presentation with a story because I find that I relax when I'm telling a story, that I'm the only one who knows the story. So if I mess up the pieces of the story, nobody knows that because I'm the only one who knows how the story played out. So if I lose my place, then I can generally, kind of get back on track and end where I needed to end, and nobody knows any better. The other thing that I like to do besides start with a story at the beginning is make it a personal story, and something that can be kind of self-deprecating. So if you think about it, what's one of the ways to even the playing field? I mean, one of the problems I find that speakers sometimes get into is they make themselves the expert. And right there, you're setting yourself, in my opinion, up for feeling pressure to have all the answers and to have to always be right. And I don't like that feeling. In fact, I like for it to be more like, hey, I'm just here to share. And if you take something away from my experience, great. If you don't, then at least we'll have enjoyed our time together. But this concept of sharing, and it ties back to gratitude, helps me feel like it's a give and take, and one where I'm here to share. And really, it's up to the audience to take from it what they feel like is important, as opposed to, I have all the answers and therefore I must be right. And so that's one of the tools too that I find is helpful, is really kind of structuring that first 60 seconds, let's say, so that you control how it gets started.
I love that. So it's really more of a conversation and I'll just go first.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, even like in this environment, I love interaction and conversation and things like that, because I think we all learn a lot from each other. So any presentation that I do, I tell everybody up front, say, look, I don't stand still, and I don't do well being the only person talking the whole time. So that's just sort of the nature of what helps me feel like, okay, this is going to be something that we all participate in.
Well, that's nice. And then one of our good friends and colleagues, Mark LeBlanc, will say, I live in a world of more than one right answer. Yep. I think putting that out there right at the beginning too takes some pressure off you. We live in a world of more than one right answer, and I'm going to share what's worked for me and my clients. Then it takes away the pressure that I'm being judged, and I'm going to have some and if you do get pushback, then it's like the rest of the audience knows, like, hey, he already said this isn't the only way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we all have to be willing to admit when either like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, let me start over with that statement, or, actually, I've come to realize that that's not true. And I think the more that we can become real and acknowledge that, we don't always have all the answers, I think that helps the audience feel like this is something that, okay, I can relate to this person. Whereas if it's expert driven, and there are situations, especially clinically, where it does need to be expert driven. But by and large, when it comes to leadership and things like that, leadership can be quite messy. And as a result, there are many different ways to be an effective leader, not just one.
Right, for sure, for sure. So we do have, I think, Sandra, you had mentioned in the chat, share your failures. You're asking Dave to share. Can you clarify that for me a little bit, what you mean?
No, when he was saying how when you get up and you start talking, if you share a failure, sometimes that is a better way than getting up and saying, my life is perfect. I know how to do everything right.
For sure.
I was excited to share a failure, Sandra. Well, okay.
Hey, well, I'm listening. Can I say one thing about controlling your breath? I have a son who had severe asthma as a child, and I read something about that when they're in an asthma attack, that you should, forcibly breathe properly to try to calm them down, even though it's not all anxiety. And it was just funny because, as he would get better or as he got older, he would look at me and say, will you stop with that breathing stuff?
Well, I guarantee you, as he gets older, he's going to teach his own kids that. You can guarantee he will.
I'm sure, yeah.
But there's the breathing technique that I find is really easy to remember is what's called box breathing. And it's simply the same. You inhale, let's say a count of 3, hold it for 3 seconds, exhale for 3, hold for 3, and it's just in the shape of a box. And that's one of the things that gives you structure, but also helps to control many elements of your physiology in that moment. And is something that even Navy SEALs and people, who do the kinds of stuff that you can actually die doing rely on. So
yeah. Ooh, breath is so important. That's a really good point. So we do have another question here from Tim. Thank you, Tim. So that he notes there are many frameworks for telling a story, and wonder if you have a particular framework that you use or recommend, or any insights from neuroscience that can help us maybe improve our stories.
Well, that's a great question. I think from a standpoint of neuroscience, the notion of a story is one that helps everyone relate to, how I mentioned that the SCARF model has relatedness as the R. And I find that the relatedness element is really important to establish at the front. So Catherine Eitel, and there are a number of coaches who are involved with DCI who are great at teaching the art of storytelling. And actually, Catherine has been a coach of mine for many years as well. But I find that shorter is better, because it's really easy to lose your way, just like in the woods. The farther you go into the woods, the easier it is to lose your way. And the same way with a story. And so the shorter, the better. If you can inject humor, then I think that's a really powerful way to kind of alleviate everybody's anxiety. And, as Sandra mentioned, share a failure. One of my failures on the stage actually happened at Jumpstart a couple of years ago. But I don't even now look at it really as a failure, because it was during, a 6-minute presentation where, you look at every situation that could have created pressure, it was there.
A competition.
And it was competition in front of all my peers and judged, and with a big clock in front of you. So, if I were to say, what were the ways to create the most pressure possible, that would be all of them. The only thing I didn't realize was that an experience I'd had when I was 15 years old was going to come up in my consciousness when I was standing up on stage. Totally forgotten about it. But it then came up and took front and center of my consciousness. So, that we can talk about the neuroscience of that. But I don't know if any of you have ever felt cortisol effectively take over your brain, but I did in that moment. And it was like somebody had poured warm milk on my head. And I felt it just literally coming down. And I knew I had about 3 seconds before my conscious brain was going to shut off. And so that right then is when I went back and I took a step back and went back to the middle of the stage and just closed my eyes for a moment. Come to find out, everybody thought I was doing this on purpose. I wasn't. But I don't know how I thought of it at the moment. I said, this is what it looks like when you experience this type of situation on a stage. And everyone started laughing, but I was telling the truth.
Yeah.
So that's also one of the things that I find as a tool is if you can have sort of a safety valve of what am I going to do if everything shuts off, meaning
sorry,
your whole brain shuts off, everything shuts off, and you don't know what to do next. You got to have something to grab on in the worst case scenario. And so that's where I think your presentation boiled down to an acronym is a really powerful tool because you know the acronym, nobody else does. And you could always just go back and say, okay, I've covered the first two. Now I'm ready for the third part. And it's really easy to say, we're going to take I just took a little detour there. My brain decided to take the exit. Now I'm back. And you can turn it into like, oh, okay, now I'm going to keep right on going on my presentation. And here's the next point. But you've got to be willing to pause for a moment. And now there was part of me at the time that wanted to walk off the stage. In fact, I can remember looking at the stairs going, it would be so easy for me just to walk right off. But something kept me up there. And I think probably just the fact that, okay, come on, everybody's been in this situation at some point and you're not going to die. So I stayed there and I had people come up to me afterwards and say, did you do that on purpose? And I'm like, I wish I was that smart because I am not that smart.
And what felt like an eternity to you was really just a couple of seconds to the rest of us.
Well, they call that the theory of relativity, right?
Right.
What feels like an hour was actually 5 seconds. And I promise you, it felt like an hour.
So can we unpack that a little bit more if we go back to what you've already shared with us? So there's these ideas of for the rest of us who mere mortals, all of us, right? We'll have these moments where we have our speech, somewhat memorized, and we know our speech and we know what's next, and we'll still it'll just go out the ear, right? We'll just forget for a minute. So you talked about one way to help us with anxiety to get things started was to maybe tell a story or something that kind of gets us talking. We talked about some breathing techniques.
Yeah, box breathing. Yeah.
What else would you suggest? Is there a couple other tips that we have on ways for us to just deal on the stage with that type of a pressure to help us? We talked about maybe it being kind of more of a conversation versus being memorized.
Well, let me just pause for a moment there. If something happens to you, like happened to me, where you just get distracted, something happens, you literally lose your place. You don't know where you were and nor what to do. In my opinion, you've got to do something physical, not mental. It's got to be something physical that then leads the mental part of it.
Like the walking back on the stage.
Like the walking back to a place, I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, then I was able to refocus. Mm-hmm. But it was because of the sequence that I knew like the back of my hand of where I was, and then I picked up again. But I had to do something physical first.
Were you purposely walking back like in your mind to where you could pick up again? Is that
Yeah, well, I don't recall exactly. I was toward the front of the stage, and I remember turning and walking back to the middle back of the stage. So for me, it was like I needed to kind of mentally reset. So I needed to get to the back of the stage so I could sort of come back into the presentation. So that's something that I find, and again, sports or otherwise, pressure is a function of physical and mental coming together. And a lot of times you can alleviate pressure by doing something physical. that's the opposite of what you've been doing. So if you've been sitting, get up and move. If you've been moved, then take a break and sit. At that moment, I couldn't sit down. There was no place to sit down. But what I could do was I could move from where I was, which was stationary on the stage. And so I turned around and went back to where I needed to be to start, kind of reset. And you know what? The other thing too is I think everyone has to have the courage to say, time out, I need a minute.
Oh yeah.
So
sure.
What I recommend people do, and I always have in the back of my mind, is if I've lost my place, I need a moment to reset, then I always have an activity ready for the audience to do that is going to integrate something that I've spoken about.
That's amazing.
So that I could always say, you know what we're going to do? Let's just take a break real quick. I'm going to pair you off. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to focus on this, and you're come back, and then we're going to pick right back up where we were. So you've got 3 minutes, pair, share, go.
That's an amazing idea.
That gives me time to
figure out where you were.
Go back to my outline, say, okay, now get my breathing under control first. Again, that's physical. And then go back to my outline and say, okay, I'm going to step up, move forward. And here's the thing that I realized after that presentation is the audience had virtually no awareness of what was going on until I literally admitted it.
Right.
And then it was obvious. But the audience doesn't pick up on most of what's going on in your own head.
Right.
It's far worse in your own mind than it is to anyone watching you. So if you can hold it together enough to take a break, have the audience do some activity, that's a valuable couple minutes that can totally allow you the time to regroup.
That's $1 million idea right there. Like there's so much in just this last little section that you unpacked there that's really important for each of us to remember as speakers and consultants. This idea of having especially speakers, of having something available for them to do. I mean, that not only works for in a situation where you need to regain your place in your program, try to figure out where you're at, or well, where was I going with that? Which is a Vanessa moment. It's like, why did I go down this rabbit hole? What was I doing again? Because that's how my brain works. But also, let's say you're at a major meeting, you're going to be scouted. I mean, I hear people say that, Catherine teaches this for sure, that you want to have something ready to pull out of your pocket at a moment's notice where you get your people up and moving and interacting. I mean, there's a lot of different uses for having those tools in your tool belt. You can just pull out a little activity, and you shared with us an idea kind of vaguely of an activity there, but it'd be important for you guys to think about, what could I pull out and have them just pair share or journal or do something for a minute. I love that. I want to, with an eye on the time, I want to just check in with a group here. You shared a lot of great tips for us today, Dave, and there's a couple of things we can do. We could either go to do a breakout, or I'm thinking maybe we've got enough people here for 4 groups. We could send you off into pairs for about 10 minutes, and then we could come back and debrief. Do we want to do that? We go off and have a chance to chat with a colleague and kind of work on some of this, or do you want to stay in Q&A? What would you
You're asking the group, right?
I'm asking the group, yeah. What you guys would like to do. You want to go off to breakouts, or do you want to stay here? Do you have more questions? Stay in Q&A. Okay. All right, so then let's hear more questions. I know.
Yeah, so let's have the cues.
Yeah, let's have the cues. I know we had one more question here from Anne-Marie, and I just want to thank you for the question, Anne-Marie. And I want to highlight that Dave's expertise is not story development. But the question here is, would you tell the whole story at the beginning or interjecting the story throughout the presentation? So as far as it relates to performance and pressure, what would you do there? Dave?
If you can. And again, this is where the skill comes into it. It strikes me as taking a lot more skill to have a story carry throughout a presentation. If you have that skill, then I think it's very powerful to say, hey, you remember that story I told? Well, let me tell you how it relates to what we just talked about. And then I think that would be brilliant if you could do that. That would be very difficult, I think. So it's like a graduate level version of that. But I think if you can do it, it could be really, really neat how you could weave it throughout.
I agree.
Yeah,
you know, and
I
in
would
our program, we have multiple speaker development coaches that can help with that. Catherine Itelbild, of course, is wonderful. Eleni Kalakos is wonderful. Margie Schaller, Patricia Fripp, or four that come to mind. So in our Dental Speaker Institute, under the curriculum page, you'll find there are 15 to 20, I lose track of the number, faculty members that we have there, and many of them are on content development and presentation skills from the standpoint of something like this as well. In your workshop, I don't see any other questions at the moment, so if anybody else comes up with something for us, let us know. I was pulling up here and looking at our objectives from the workshop. I was going to go there to ask you a question myself. Oh, here's one. I've heard, and thanks, Jen, I've heard part of our fear, pressure, anxiety is we're focused on ourselves or our ego versus if you focus on the audience and who you're trying to help, making it about them. That could help alleviate pressure. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that fits right in line with what we were talking about earlier with respect to gratitude. Because gratitude is not about yourself, it's about others. And I think that is tailor-made for a mindset. And I just characterize it in my own brain as sharing. But that's kind of the other side of the same coin is gratitude, the idea that I'm here to give and feel a sense of gratitude for the audience being there. Another element that comes up in my mind about this notion of pressure comes from focusing on yourself. I would 100% agree with that. So part of your prep, I think, could be on what is my audience coming here needing? What is my audience coming here to learn? And because the truth is that, I think we fall into the trap of thinking that our audience, well, they know all this stuff, they've heard it before, and what could I possibly have to offer? Well, the truth is that there's only a little bit of overlap between what you know and what they know. And so there really is a lot that you have to bring to this, if not actual new information, but framed or structured in a way that makes sense to you. It may trigger for someone else in a way that had never landed with them before. So focusing on the sense of gratitude, another tip that I've learned along the way is when you're speaking, you know how we are taught to make eye contact and speak to the audience. Maybe speak to one person at a time, like one in the middle, one on each side, and you actually speak to that individual person. All of a sudden, the rest of everybody there kind of fades away, and now you're just talking to one person. And you could have a conversation that way as opposed to a conversation with the entire group. So that would be a couple of tips too, I think.
Those are really wonderful tips. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dave. And and Shannon, thank you for your question. Most of her anxiety is before the presentation, like a week or two before, and she's not sure she's preparing for it. She loved the memorize your topic, not your presentation, and boil it down to acronyms, and wondered if you had any more nuggets that you could share about preparation and that time period. Yeah,
I think, and I'm going to borrow something from the world of sports because that's kind of how my brain's wired. So in the world of sports, let's take, any type of sporting environment. Let's take golf, for those of you who play golf. You're going to want it. You probably learn golf in a driving range or in an artificial setting. But once you learn kind of the mechanics, really playing golf is about being on the course in the different environments, weather, different conditions, different lies, how the ball is and things to go over and under and all that sort of stuff. And I find that we need to do the same with our presentations. You know how I mentioned earlier about, you have to decide what on-ramp you choose to get up on the freeway, but as far as which exits you can take or how fast you go until you get to the next exit you need to take, you get to decide that. And so that's where I would much rather you have a sense of what your exits are, but then the freedom to take detours in between your exits so that you actually look forward to the gap. And now you're paying attention to the audience, looking for something to grab onto or to use or to dive into, instead of having to feel like you have to have all the content for the entire time that you're up there. I much prefer there, again, I think Vanessa, you hit on it about a conversation. So I'm always looking for and coach people to look for, pay attention to the audience and what are they responding to, or what things have you noticed in the venue, or there are all kinds of things you can observe that you could weave into a presentation that is relevant to what you're kind of even the place you are, or certainly what's happening in the world right now. So the preparation, and how to tie it back to your preparation is, know your topic, don't memorize your presentation, but rehearse in different environments. And, depending on the length of your presentation, if it's a 6-hour full day thing, that's a little challenging, but you can break it up into pieces.
Right.
But at the end of the day, and this is what happens in sports, when it comes time to perform, you have to trust. You have to trust that you've trained all these years for this moment. And I just find that, okay, it's game time. And I just have to trust that I'm going to know, and my brain's going to bring up whatever information I need in order to be able to answer a question or to know where to go. And that takes practice too, is that notion of trusting. So put yourself in more situations where you have to trust that you're going to come up with the answer. So that's kind of tied to the prep.
And don't you think too, a lot of this comes from just delivering your content over and over, like you talk with your consulting clients about it, you've given this presentation before, it's kind of like, so you end up with that agenda in your mind, or like the not the outline in your mind. Yeah. And so then you just kind of automatically, so it's not really memorizing the speech, but still you have so many things memorized you could teach them. Like one of my 2-day workshops, I could teach that thing in my sleep because I've done it so many times.
Yeah.
So like you could pull pieces from that and just deliver it and be able to shorten it or lengthen it. So it doesn't help out when you're just starting to teach. You don't have that yet, but the more that repetition, I find for me, it makes it easy to kind of just pull something out of your back pocket.
Well, there's no doubt that experience gives you that luxury, because you've been in enough situations where, someone's asked a question and took the tone of the presentation a different direction that you didn't expect.
Yes.
But you know what? I find that there are a lot of hidden nuggets in allowing that to happen, but you're the captain of the ship, you're the driver. So you've got to bring it back onto the freeway, because you can't go off road too long or else you're liable to get stuck and not be able to get back.
Right. And navigating our audience and whether they want to take us off track or not is like a whole nother topic, right? Like there's a whole.
Well, that's true. And how much comfort level you have with going off topic momentarily, but then bringing everybody back, because you do this long enough, then you'll end up with people in the audience who want to take you off track.
Yeah.
And as soon as you sense that you've encountered someone who is trying to get you off track, then you get to decide, am I going to take that on, or am I going to just set it aside and control the narrative and effectively say thanks, but no thanks. I've done it both ways, just because I was not in a mood to entertain someone trying to distract me. So I said, okay, let's go. And so, that probably wasn't the best way to handle it. But,
I was waiting to see where this is going, Dave.
But, in the end, you always have to be professional. But can you ask a follow-up question saying, okay, well, where did that come from? What's really on your mind? Yeah. That was your initial question, but I find that there's really something else driving that. So what else is going on there? The more people talk, the more they dig themselves a hole ordinarily. So I'm not advocating that, but don't be afraid of the person who's trying to take you off track. But it is your responsibility to steer back up on the freeway ultimately.
In all of these areas, I mean, it just highlights for us the importance of, as speakers, for us to develop our skills, for us to do things like attend workshops and to work with coaches, because it would be rare for us to be a speaker and consultant and just naturally have the ability to navigate all these situations. And so it highlights to me the importance of working with people like you, Dave, or attending your workshop. And like, I'm not like trying to sell it, but I'm just saying, like, logically, when we invest in our skills, then it helps us be able to have those available to you. We don't have to be on the stage trying to figure out, how do I handle this participant? If we already have had these kind of courses. So I thought, anyway, that's what's coming up for me. I have another question, and probably our last questions are getting close to the top of the hour. Pina, thank you, Pina. Ask for any tips when you're asked to speak and have only a couple weeks to prepare, and it's a brand new audience to you. Do we mean like maybe even a new topic, Pina, that type of thing, like a brand new?
Not a new topic, but just a new audience, like not dentists, not, like for me, for example, I've been speaking to dentists and dental teams, and this is a whole new audience. It's neither one of those. So that's a little intimidating.
Is the topic consistent for you?
Yes. It is.
So that's, to me, again, think about where I came from. I came from sports psychology, and I work with dentists, not exclusively, but to a large degree. Okay. How did I get here from there? I mean, the only way I got from sports to dentistry was to pull my content out of the specificity of sports and say, how does it apply? And so I guarantee you, if you've been talking to dentists and their teams about anything, that if you take the word dentistry out of a phrase and insert whatever environment you're going into, likely it applies. Make it about people, not about the venue.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that help at all?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, let's see. Okay, we have one more. Oh, who is the skier in the background?
Not me. I'll say that, because I've never skied like that. But that is actually a signed picture of an Olympic skier named Eric Schlope. How about that for the name of a skier? Schlope. But he was a three-time U.S. Olympian and a longtime client of mine that he and I've been friends for years now. But yes, he's one of the best, just most humble, most talented athletes I've ever worked with. And so that's a picture of Eric skiing in one of his events.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous.
Yeah, he was on the national team on the he was actually inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame a few years ago. So he was on the FIS World Cup for almost 20 years, which is very, very rare.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. And Dave, thank you for sharing your information with us, guiding us on these tips for performing under pressure. Kim, if you could put some details in the chat for us, I appreciate it. We'd love to give Dave's website, drdavestreagle.com, and you've got a link there. And thank you, and the email address, and then also some details on or the link to find the Take Your Shot Perform Under Pressure workshop in April 21st. I really can't share enough what a fabulous workshop that was. I highly encourage each of you to think about participating with that, and reach out to Dave if you have any questions. Also, Dave, your book, could you hang up or hold up your book for us? I think we have a link in there for the book.
That's where the notion of Take Your Shot came from. And I actually wrote the book during the pandemic. Because why not? Didn't have a whole lot else to do. So I figured, but there are a lot of stories in there about various clients I've worked with, even my own experiences, and also dentists. So there is a definite dental feel to it, but it's my first book, and it's a pretty quick read.
That's fabulous. Sandra was just saying she has your book and loves it, and she had to hop off for another meeting.
Oh, okay, cool,
yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you all for being here.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you'd like to say goodbye or thank you to Dave, and we will get you a link if you'd like to listen in again, and so watch for your email. And we'll see you in February, but we'll see you before that on our virtual day, January 13th, of our Dental Speaker Institute's Jump into 2023 meeting. So in the meantime, reach out if you guys have any questions. Please reach out to Dr. Dave if you'd like to know more about working with him or his workshop. And Dave, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to see everybody, and I hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving and a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night.